Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Abhijat Saraswat. If this is the first time you're joining us, this is Fringe Legal Edge, where I interview experts and leaders on things that will give your practice an edge. Today, my guest is Robert Camp. He is the owner of Robert Camp Consulting. Robert was the managing partner of Stephen Scown for 9 years, and during that time, he executed on his vision for creating a different type of firm. And in that 10-year, he doubled the headcount, doubled the profits. He's currently the director of strategic innovation at the firm, right? And yeah, today we will dive into a whole host of topics. But firstly, Robert, thanks for joining me.
No, absolute pleasure. So really nice to be here, and hopefully I can share a few nuggets and insights.
Oh, for sure. And I'm sure I missed out a whole host of things in the very quick introduction. Because you practiced before that at Simmons, I believe, right? Overseas in Hong Kong, Sydney, and other places.
Yeah, I worked in the city of London, and then had some period in Sydney and Hong Kong with Simmons and Simmons, and then moved to a provincials firm in the UK. Yeah. Mining and minerals lawyer and commercial property lawyer by training, but actually I love the leadership and management more than the law, I think.
Fair enough. And I guess that's part of what I wanted to touch on, and maybe that's where we can start. As I looked at what I guess to both today as part of the strategic innovation arm, and also through the consulting arm for your personal business, I saw words like, focus on culture, engagement, the customer journey, and strategic innovation. Certainly the top three around culture, engagement, and customer journey. Those aren't really things I hear many lawyers speak about. I'm sure they think about it to give them credit, right? But it's not something that comes to the surface very frequently. So do you think from your journey is what led you to think about it in that way, right? Having practiced and then focusing on the management aspect of things, is that how that vision come to develop?
Yeah, I think I quite often sort of tongue-in-cheek say I should never have been a lawyer, but should have been an entrepreneur. So I've always got ideas fizzing in my head. I was very fortunate when I took over as managing partner. The firm allowed me to go to Harvard to do their law leadership intensive course, which was fantastic. But also I got 2 non-exec directors, which again was quite cutting edge for a law firm back then. And they were really instrumental in showing me how a corporate business should be run rather than a professional services firm. Right. And that really started the journey. But I had big ideas right from the start. I wanted to create this different type of law firm. And it was the non-execs who really pushed me and challenged me as to what I meant by that. And over a period of time, that vision was sort of formulated. And then we started working on it very close, just myself and the non-execs, before we went out to the board and then the partners and then the firm. But people is the thing that really fascinates me. You know, how do you get the best out of your team? And then the customer journey part. It was very easy to get the partners on board for exceptional customer service, and not so easy to get them on board for employee engagement. But if you want lasting customer service, you've got to have engaged employees.
100%. We'll touch on that in a second. I'm curious though. One of the things you talked about, there's a difference in running a corporate business versus a professional services business. And I mean, I 100% agree with you. It's something that I still don't think is common practice. And I still think it gets muddled up, right? How you structure and actually execute on those different types of businesses. What's one or two things that are really stand out for you as you think about those different business types?
Yeah, and it's very difficult to sort of say to your fellow partners that actually all they are shareholders and not owners of the business. Right. But what we did was we created a framework, and it was 4 lenses that the partners agreed me and the board could use to make decisions. So we had these lenses that every decision that the board made, we try to have a commercial element, because too often professional partnerships make decisions without thinking about the commercial benefit. We also wanted them to be medium to long term, again, cutting out the short termism of an LLP as we are in the UK, where you strip out all the profits every year. We wanted them to be firm first, so actually benefit the whole organization, to try and shy away from the overly competitiveness of some lawyers. And then we wanted them to be fair, which fitted in with our culture. So once we'd agreed those lenses, actually it made it a lot easier to have a more corporate structure of governance and decision making, because the partners could challenge me, but if I could show, well, look, I believe we've gone through those lenses, show me where I haven't and I'll listen to you, but don't just complain because you don't like the decision.
Yeah. And how easy was it to get agreement on those 4 lenses in the first place?
Oh, it took time. Yeah. You know, we went through, in 8.5 years, we completely transformed the firm. And when I talk about it and present it in 40 minutes, it sounds like everything was easy, but no.
That's why I asked that question, because sometimes it is, you know, you compress time very quickly and it just feels like, oh yeah, that seems so easy, but I'm sure there were challenges in getting it.
Yeah, we had an external consultant who really helped us over a period of 18 months with that governance and that culture piece.
Awesome. In your role today, and I'm still focusing on the firm side of things for the moment, so you do strategic innovation. So I think I'm in agreement with almost everyone that, look, you do need to innovate, right? That you need to be able to create new things or new ways of doing things that are currently happening. But innovation is one of those things that if I ask 100 people, I will likely get 100 different answers on what that is. So let's start there, if you don't mind, on what, you know, how do you, and I won't ask you to define innovation or anything like that, but how do you actually think about innovation? What sits in the innovation buckets?
Yeah, well, I think for me, and dealing with innovation in a professional services firm, how can you make step change improvements in what you're doing? Right. So we're not going to suddenly invent something completely new because we're focused on our day job. But how do we look at the day job, how we interact with customers or clients, and make a step different? So I think it goes beyond just the marginal gains that we're all looking to get, the incremental change. How do you actually create a step change? By looking at a problem or a frustration and thinking, actually, let's reverse engineer it. Let's look at it from the client's perspective. How can we make that process a better process, a better way of delivery, a better way of engaging? So yeah, it's not what some people call innovation, but it's more than just the incremental gains.
And how do you actually measure those gains? Do you start by, you know, setting benchmarks on, well, this is how we're performing today, and we want to increase it by 10x or 5x or whatever else it might be? Or, and I ask this because in professional services, it's also challenging, other than just measuring, you know, effectiveness as a function of time to delivery. That doesn't really take into consideration quality. For one, it doesn't take into consideration other value added things that aren't being that aren't forming part of the equation. So yeah, how do you measure that?
Yeah, and I think that's a real challenge in that how do you even get decisions on new processes, systems, or when you can't show the partners a real the return on investment as you would normally do. But I think one of the things we did was we started to focus on the customer. So actually, one of the best KPIs and metrics is your customer feedback, because if you're getting good feedback both from your your surveys, but also Google reviews and things like that, then actually that's a very good metric, because that's where we get our business. Most of our brand ambassadors are actually our existing clients and customers who are going to sell our services to their colleagues and peers. So we did a lot on the customer journey, and we were quite innovative in that, in how we could really enhance the customer journey. And then we did a lot of feedback to make sure we were giving the customer client what they wanted. So we were one of the first law firms in the UK to have a client-facing app, which was purely for the client and the matters that we were working on, not selling us. It wasn't a marketing app. It was And that was 7 years ago, so it was quite cutting edge.
At that time, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that the key differentiator there is, it's not something that's just marketing you. And I heard you speak about on a different podcast, I think it was, where you were talking about, especially if you look at what firms are producing today in light of the pandemic, still quite black and white, right?
Yes.
It lacks this personality. And I think that connection element is there. And I mean, it is a difficult and fine line to walk. You don't want to get too goofy, but you do have to be human, and you do have to be empathetic to, look, if we're advising you on decisions that impact your staff, that, talk about furloughs and whatever else it might be, it can't just be, here's a booklet on, how to deal with this. It should be, let's have a conversation on how we worked with others on, working through these difficult conversations or framing these different things. But yeah, I don't know if you wanted to add there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to language, and lawyers are wordsmiths, and we love writing and producing language, and that's great for the documentation. But actually, if you're engaging with a client, you need to speak to them as you would do just in a coffee shop or having a beer with them. And actually, the pandemic, as I think, has highlighted this. We need to understand that emotional journey that everybody's on, and they're all on a different part of the continuum. And we need to not judge that, just understand actually. But even before the pandemic, I was trying to talk to our firm about language, and how do you get a corporate lawyer to really connect with the emotional journey that somebody who's built a business for 40 years is then selling? The corporate lawyer will just see the dollars or the pound sign and the millions and think, I've got to get this through. For the person selling, this is a life-changing moment, and it's not actually the money that matters. They are selling their baby that they have grown. How do you get lawyers to really
because it's a validation point for them, isn't it? Right? They've spent this 40 years building this thing, and don't get me wrong, the money will be important, but it's more that the money is a validation of all the hard work and effort they put into that. Hey, this thing is valued in the market to everyone else to pay this amount, and bringing that out is so important, and having that transparency element, especially when you are dealing in such transactional matters, is so crucial. Just because I speak to a lot of lawyers, and when we talk about, look, our clients keep calling us to get an update on where are we with this transaction, right? Have we done these things that we needed to do on the checklist? Have we got the signature? They're asking for that not because they just want to be annoying. It's because they want that transparency, because if you think about the way people interact with technology or other things, they do have that visibility. Law is still one of those weird areas where people go in willing to spend and listen to an expert, but without really understanding what's going on behind the scenes. And people want that. They want that comfort.
Yeah, and I started calling this about 4 years ago. I called it the human digital. So we don't do a lot of process driven work. Most of our clients are owner managers or CEOs of family businesses, and they want that human connection, but also over the last 3 or 4 years, they want that digital side, which is really slick. They are used to buying non-legal services, and they're used to the internet. They're used to the Amazons and the Netflix and the challenger banks. And they do question, why do law firms not embrace the stuff that's been done by everybody else, which is normal? And in a way, that comes back to your question, what's innovation? Innovation for law firms is actually quite often what most other people have been doing for the last 10 years.
I completely agree. And I was speaking to someone earlier about data analytics and leveraging just data, and law firms sit on massive piles of information and data. And this field of data informatics seems to be becoming more popular within the legal profession, but it's not new, and people have to realize that. And there seems to be this want to try and solve these problems from scratch without looking at, hey, let's learn the lessons from finance, let's learn the lessons from the challenger banks that you talked about, right? How do you present this information to your clients? How do you actually use this information internally? And this is where you look at the consultancies like the PwCs and the KPMGs of the world, because they have the expertise. They have all the models built out, and all they're doing is picking up the data that's from the legal arm and putting it in there, and they have this beautiful dashboard and output that they can present to their clients, and it's valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things we introduced was using our own financial dashboard. We created a dashboard that the client could log into, because historically law firms have sent reports to clients. The FD, for example, you get a monthly report of all the matters, but it's how we do the report. The FD then has to spend hours slicing and dicing it to get it into report for the board. Whereas actually, if they can have access, live access, they can just pull the report off themselves when they want, in the format they want, the metrics that they want to focus on that month. And it's just understanding that we need to assist the client, not be leading the client all the time.
Yeah. And I think that's probably as good a segue as we're going to get to talk about, because one of the things I wanted to talk about is when one is thinking about setting up a innovation initiative, and let's imagine that to be whatever is valuable and innovative for the firm. Where do you start? And then we'll move on to, if we have time, to, well, how do you grow / sustain that? But how does one get started with, let's say you have an idea that or maybe you don't. How do you actually decide where to begin?
Well, I think we've got an innovation hub of about 30 members across the organization, from people in accounts through to partners and lawyers. Ask them, so internally, ask where are the real frustrations, but then the other side of the coin is ask the clients, what are the things that are causing you that frustration when you're dealing with us? And it could be anything that impacts on how they're interacting with us and the delivery of the service. So I think those are the way to start, rather than trying to just think up something that will improve the client journey. Actually ask the client, because you could spend an awful lot of time and money doing something that the client says, well, it's nice, but it doesn't really add value to my experience. Equally, ask your staff, where are the frustrations in your day job? And then think, and one of the things I did say to our innovation hub is, any idea that you come up with has got to have a customer facing benefit. So don't just think of internal processes. Clearly, if you can save time, if we can create a process that saves you time, you'll have more time for the customer.
Right.
But always have the customer in mind as the end result. How is this going to impact and improve that customer journey?
So this, it's a slight segue. The Innovation Hub, tell me the makeup of that roughly. Is it just lawyers? Is it a mix?
No, it's right across the firm. So people from finance, reception, support staff, lawyers, HR, IT. So yeah, anybody can join it actually, which is great. And then we meet every other month. We're the sifting of ideas. Yeah. We do the sort of, is the concept going to work? We don't actually go to proof of concept, but we'll do all the theory. We'll get people in to come and present, and we'll kick around it, kick the tires and everything before we can put something to our board.
Okay.
And it's small things, big things, and that's what I love about innovation. Some of the things are really, really small. Some of them are actually, complete change of process that's going to take months to embed.
And so I've had this concept of a innovation pipeline, which I've written about separately, which is essentially, I don't think it's a novel idea, but I'll fully take credit for it, is that you should have, a mixture of both small and large ideas. So you should know, hey, this is my pipeline for types of projects. Maybe if I have 3 months worth of resources, I can, just knock out. Or these are things that may take us 2 years because they have to be, there's complexities, or these are really moonshot ideas that are going to fundamentally change how we are actually set up as a business, or how we provide the service, or the services we provide completely. And they're sort of moonshot. We may get to them at some point, or something needs to happen in the world, in the market, for us to trigger that. Is that sort of the kind of things that you are doing in this hub? You're looking at sort of short-term, long-term projects? Yeah,
and we're looking at also new products as well, products and services in that line. And again, even before the pandemic, because we've got quite a rural client base as well, act for a lot of landowners and farmers, we were looking, how could we look at the legal implications of agri-tech? And now, of course, that's really taken off with the pandemic. And actually, we've got some quite good data on how we might be able to assist the farming and the agricultural community as they start to engage with agri-tech, because that's a massive change to that sector. So it's looking where we can start adding value, getting the knowledge early, and then how do we design a product or service that will actually tap into that market. And you know, the pandemic has created some fantastic opportunities for new ways of doing things and small things.
And the only way you can actually take advantage of them is if you've been thinking about them just before it happens, right? If you get to it as when you're in reaction mode or reactive mode, it doesn't quite work so much. Okay, so you have some ideas that you guys have kicked around the room, and the next step, it sounds like, is to then propose to the board. And what happens from there? Is that a process where you're whittling down from these are 5 ideas, we want you to help select 1 or 2, or?
Yes, yeah, and then if they think if they want us to then go to a proof of concept, the innovation hub will be we'll do the first round of due diligence on what we need, budgets, time, suppliers, or if it's a third party, we'll do the short list of suppliers so that we can present a much fuller paper to the board, saving them all the time, because as you say, they're much more focused on the operational side of the business.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. And assuming things are successful and you pick something, it passes a due diligence and the proof of concept stages, and the firm takes it. One of the challenges I've seen a lot of is usually there's a lot of fanfare when you roll out anything, right? Because people are, rightly excited about it. How do you sustain that level of excitement and engagement for prolonged periods of time, right? So you roll something out, let's say it's a piece of technology, a technology platform of some sort. How do you sustain the excitement and engagement for 6, 9, 12 months time? So at least it doesn't dip and hopefully it grows.
Yeah, well, that was one of my learnings, in that I tried to do sort of big bang rollouts of a couple of initiatives, and they did really struggle, and actually much more time and effort was needed. So we do small pilots, which we then just start incrementally increasing. And I think, again, because lawyers are very competitive deep down, so actually if they see one team has got a new toy and it's working and that team are talking about it, they'll start saying, oh, when can we have it? And it's quite nice to say, well, actually you're in the pipeline for 3 months time, so that the anticipation starts building for them for when they get it, as well as, of course, trying to iron out some of the wrinkles that invariably come when you roll out a new system, process, or product.
Right. And in the virtual world, how are you getting people to talk to each other to know what the other practices or the lawyers actually have?
Yeah, well,
in an office environment, it's a bit easier, right? You just see someone, talk about it.
Yeah, and I think we're still, struggling of how we come out of the changed world that we live in. But it's Zoom, it's WhatsApp, it's collaborative tools, Teams, anything. But I think at the moment, and I suspect most firms are like that, certainly in the UK, is we're still sort of in the, not firefighting, we've gone through that, but actually this isn't the normal that we want to be in. We want to make it better, but we don't quite know how to make it better. And in the UK, we were told we could all start going back into the offices, and then 2 weeks later we were told you can't. It's been difficult. And how do you integrate new members of your team when somebody joins? So a lot of work on that. In a way, a lot of it just comes down to communication and agreeing some protocols and systems that everybody's going to abide by. Sometimes just small things, right? We're all going to use our calendars. We're going to keep them up to date so we know where people are. We're all going to use our mobiles rather than not. It's small things, but behavioral change, which we've all had to adapt to. But how do we make the best of the opportunities?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's been highlighted in the last 6 months, everyone, I feel at least, and I could be wrong, has had a rapid education on behavioral change and behavioral psychology, where you are quite aware of exactly what you need to do or what the trigger points are for you as an individual to adapt to an environment, to a change in environment, to change in a way of working, where before that, even last year, people, of course, people knew what some of those triggers were, but individuals didn't know what worked for them or what didn't work for them, right? So you are, as a change agent, you're throwing things at the wall based on intuition, based on some science, and hoping something works, and you go with it. And it's always difficult because if you have 300 people, one thing is definitely not going to work for everyone. And you have to try 6 different things to achieve the same result across probably 80% of the user base as well.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely true. And I got a couple of slides I use when I talk about the pandemic. I refer to the classic change curve with pre 23rd of March in the UK, with the usual bumps and all of the frustrations, anger, excitement. But that could be, 6 to 9 months. But actually, I now call it the COVID change curve, which was days, not even weeks. Everybody moved, but actually all of those emotions are still there. Not everybody is moved and has got to acceptance. Everybody is still really on the change curve. And it's understanding that. How do you get somebody who's feeling very anxious to ask them, how would you like us to communicate with you if you're still in that anxious or anger stage, even about not being able to go into the office? So it's a lot of it comes, as you say, it's the emotional side, it's the psychology side, but you've got to talk to your people. And that at the end of the day, it comes down to communication and empathetic listening.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a huge leadership element to it as well, right? You, as a leader, that's part of your responsibility, to be sensitive to being able to notice those changes. Doesn't mean that you have to intervene all the time, but at least being aware is super important. So the time has flown by. We have about 3 minutes left. I do want to touch on, for actually one reason. I would actually encourage everyone to go and check out Robert's website. It's robertcamp.co.uk, because you have these really interesting videos. I'm trying to find them now, trying to multitask, around the genies out of the bottle. But I won't spoil that for everyone. They're short videos, like 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes each. So it's worth checking them out. I think there's 6 of them. How, as you experience and as you're focusing on this consulting arm and you're working with firms, in the last sort of 2 minutes, I'll give you the mic. The stage is yours. What's been some interesting observations, maybe things we haven't touched on already, or maybe again we've touched on already. But what are you noticing from those that you're working with as that are your clients now?
Yeah, I think they're all struggling with the operational side, but it's the enlightened clients who I'm speaking to who's saying to me, look, can you be the person who's now scanning the horizon? Can you be bringing back the ideas to us? Something they may have previously done themselves, but they know they haven't got time. Their HR director can't do it with everything that's going on with furloughing and finances relating to that. So it's, what are other organizations doing? How are they responding? What are clients doing? But a great example I spoke to one firm about is we were really encouraged in the pandemic by the government to take an hour's exercise all the time. I think I mentioned this in one of my videos. That's almost become a habit for people. So why don't you just embrace that as part of well-being for your staff and say, look, rather than just your lunch hour, if you want to go and do a 40-minute yoga class during the working day, go and do it. The other thing is we're seeing how clients are now more in control of the lawyer's diary. They will send Zoom invites at 8 o'clock in the evening and expect you to respond. But equally, you don't want your lawyers working 24 hours a day. So you've got to give that flexibility. I think the biggest thing I've noticed for enlightened firms is a move to empowerment and delegation style of leadership. They really recognize that they've got to empower their staff who are working remotely. They've got to delegate authority. But of course, the flip side is the staff have to acknowledge responsibility backwards, going up the line. So it's how do you really embrace that concept in a remote working environment? But so I'm working with a couple of firms on that. How can we really start to empower people in the marketing messages? So not everything has to go back to the marketing team for approval, because everything now is much more instant. How do you get somebody to be on brand and on message, but let them speak in their own language? A lot of people don't like that. They like command and control. Oh, I like to approve everything, especially lawyers. I can see we're running out of time.
No. I think that's probably a good place for us to end on. But no, that's really helpful. So Robert Camp of Robert Camp Consulting and Director of Strategic Innovation at Stevens Count. Thank you so much for joining me, and everyone else listening. Thank you for listening today. This will be available as a podcast later on. It'll be uploaded on YouTube for those watching this as a recording. Please do get in touch with Robert. You can find him on LinkedIn. Just search for his name and check out his website at robertcamp.co.uk. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, everyone.
And you. Bye.
Bye-bye.